السيد
organization. Through your leadership to the World Impact Alliance and your successful achievements to create influence in youth lives, I think you did it, I believe that you did it internationally. You have a vision to empower youth and to benefit from their abilities and to change societies. We would like you to share this vision with the World Youth Forum today. And my second question is, international and regional organization and civil society, how can they all work together to achieve this vision?
Thank you so much for the question. أخصائي الحضور أنا كنا هنا في اليوم في مصر. إني لا هذا اللغة العربية جميلة لكن في يوم ما سأتمكن إن شاء الله. سأواصل حديثي باللغة الإنجليزية ولكن قبل أريد أن أشكر الحكومات المصرية، أشكر الرئيس السيسي في خلق الفرص حتى يسبق العالم مكان أفضل. I am so sorry that I'm not able to speak in Arabic, but I think so much the World Youth Forum.
Can I share something? I was a witness when Mr. Carlos was rehearsing this Arabic introduction, so very good job.
And I didn't do it very well, I'm sorry. It is a great honor to be part of this forum, and I want to congratulate not only the forum and the government in Egypt, but also all the participants. It is very important that we have these debates, but also that we join to find and apply solutions for the problems that we're all facing. What we're doing in our organization is to look for specific solutions in problems like healthcare, environment, poverty, education, and human rights. And we're doing that by bringing together companies, institutions from different parts of the world, and also allowing young people and people from all generations to connect and to implement the solutions. So one of the things that we're doing right now is to select 100 solutions for each problem. So 500 solutions in total that are best practices from governments, best practices from companies. What are the things that we can do to actually solve the problem? And when we are talking about Mediterranean issues, we normally forget about the root cause of the problem. And a lot of the problems in immigration and refugee come from sub-Saharan Africa. And one of the biggest issues that we have is that the poverty that we're facing, and also the problems with climate, now that I come back from COP, from the climate convention in Madrid of the UN, and we are not realizing that as much as we want to talk about the future and the 2050 agenda of the European Commission now with the Green Deal, we have to acknowledge that there's millions of people dying right now in many countries, like in India, in Pakistan, in sub-Saharan Africa, because they don't have water. And we have this framing problem where we have right now in Europe the conversation that is led by politicians that want to gain politically of the refugee crisis. And they gain politically with that, but they frame the conversation in a way that is not really useful. And it makes us think that there are citizens of the first class citizens, and also the rest that are second class or even third class. And they excuse their discourse with the idea that there may be security concerns, but quite honestly, that's for the Muslim part, considering there's 1.6 billion Muslims in the world, and they're in the vast majority incredibly willing to support peace, and also that a lot of those refugees and migrants are not coming from Muslim countries. They are people that are just simply people of color that in the West normally, because of racism that we never talk about, we just don't want them very close because we are afraid of them. So I think that we need to frame the conversation in a useful manner, and I'm going to say a couple of things about it, and I'm going to be very, very brief. First of all, there are examples of what countries are doing to handle the situation. In Uganda, for example, they are enabling the refugees to have a situation where they can participate in the economy, and that really allows them to create, because these refugees have a lot of ideas and they really want to participate, but sometimes they lack the possibility of actually working. So with these enabling environments, one thing that has happened in Uganda is that 25% of all the refugees are creating their own businesses. And funny enough, not only that is good for the local community, but they are actually hiring local people from Uganda. So that is a good example. Another one, and you just mentioned the importance of having a way to regulate the visa. And it's really important. There's a concept that a lot of people don't talk about. And unfortunately, when we talk about it, we lack the political support for it, which is the humanitarian visa, which means that if I want to go to the north of Mediterranean, but I don't have the possibility of acquiring a visa, then I cannot travel by plane because I'm going to be stopped at the airport. And so, or I go to a refugee camp, or I go to a neighboring city and I'm going to have problems there, or I do this dangerous journey that they should know more about. Now, the concept was successfully implemented in last century is that you go to a neighboring country's consulate or an embassy and you are able to get a visa. So you pay your ticket to the country that you want to visit legally, and then you are then hosted. And that is a concept that a lot of times we just forget about. And in part, we think that refugees cannot pay for the ticket, when the reality is that the smugglers are way more expensive than that. Another thing, I'm going to be very, very brief, but another concept that is very important in order to help with the refugees is that we have this possibility of matching preferences from the countries that are going to host and the refugees themselves. Sometimes you are for example, we just mentioned that sometimes we need working people, we need young people, we may need engineers, or you can choose if you prefer people of one specific language. So by allowing countries and refugees to say what their preferences are, it's way easier to actually make the trip and to make it happen. And lastly, in terms of the solutions part, we have identified several models that can be very useful in education, in tourism for good, and in technology for good. And just with one sentence is, through the education programs that we're doing, one is called Crossing Borders. What we're doing is to have schools from different parts of the world to do video conference calls with kids of other parts of the world. So what we do with that is avoid problems of discrimination and racism and many others, because if your kid is talking to people from Africa and from India and from China, and now we are talking in the Mediterranean, if our kids are talking between themselves, then there's no way they're going to be hateful of the others, because they know that they are just people like them and they share a lot of things. Thank you.
To conclude, I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Carlos Sentis,
Young leader here in the World Youth Forum. Please show us how you will lead them to inspire the world.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the question. It's a big one, but I think I have sort of an answer. We're advocating for a concept that is the following, and it's the 3 pillars that I believe everybody should live upon, and it doesn't matter what your age is, but for the sake of the argument, for youth it's especially important. Save the world, make money, be happy. And what this means is that no matter who you are and where you are in life, you need these 3 things in order to live a meaningful life. And it is impossible to live without providing any value to society, so you really need to do something that is beyond yourself. I think that we have all experienced the feeling that we have to do something else in order to have a meaning in our life and to have a purpose. So that is the first one. And my fellow panelists just said that young people right now are activists. They all think that their life has to have some sort of contribution to society or to the environment. So Save the World is going to be important, and we need to be clear on what can we do. And there's a concept that is the for-profit social impact, or the idea of doing well by doing good, which is instead of thinking that or you make money and you're evil, or you help the others and you're the good guy, there's a lot of space in between where you can do a lot of things that are good for your career, good for your economic development, but also really solve problems. And I think that is the way to go. That's the Save the World part. And a way we're doing that is, for example, we are implementing in schools, instead of having all the kinds of assignments that you have to write things that are normally very theoretical, we are using the SDGs as a model. So we allow kids to have little projects that they create, and they have to think about how would they solve those problems practically. That's the first part. The second part, no matter who you are, if you are in the wealthiest country or you are in a developing country, you need to have the right conditions to live. It is important that you have at least the minimum and as much as you can so you live comfortably and well. I'm not talking about being hyper rich. I'm saying that we all need to have the ways to make money. And in order to do that, and this is what we are advocating in the education system, is the idea that our kids are overprotected right now. And it is fine that we avoid them having, the child labor that we used to have. The problem is that right now our kids and young generations are being kept in a bubble until they are 25. So they never get to experience what the real world is until they get out of our university. And then they stumble upon a fantastic situation where, because of the disruption that we're living in AI and many other concepts, we are going to face disruption in 50% of the jobs. So whatever you've been studying is not useful, and you don't even know how to make money. And you do need to make money. So what we're doing here, both in schools, and we're trying to create an online program that is for free for people in all kinds of situations, so they have the right skills that allow them to make money. And I'm going to mention just a couple of them. I know I don't have a lot of time. First of all, every individual, no matter how old you are, should be able to learn how to sell. Sales are absolutely crucial. I don't care who you are and what is your sector. You need to be able to say, this is what I offer, this is what I can do, and I need to find clients and convince them to buy my product or services. If you don't know how to sell, you're going to have a lot of problems, but that happens also if you're not able to do public relations, if you're not able to use the internet to sell those products, or you are not able to use the internet to promote yourself or to promote a service. Also, coding skills and public speaking are very, very important, and we're trying to include those skills inside of the education systems by doing trials and then advocating that and presenting that to the UNESCO and other organizations. But I think that everybody, regardless if you have or not the school that is teaching you those skills, should go to YouTube and find some tutorials to learn how to do those skills, because it's going to allow you to prosper. Okay? And the third part is be happy and healthy. And I say this separately because we all want to be happy, and we all have very clear misconceptions about happiness. A lot of people think that money will bring you happiness, and then you are rich and you're not happy. Or people think that if you help others, you will be happy. But if you're helping others all the time for 10 years and you live a miserable life, it is possible that you're not really enjoying your life, and you're going to regret at some time. So what we are trying to explain is that happiness depends on a lot of self-awareness and a lot of work on doing the things that you like, and to being with the people that you like, and to travel, and to take care of yourself, and to take care of mental health. That is a huge issue, and we don't talk about it enough. So I don't really need anybody to have a specific set of balance in these pillars, but everybody needs to have those three parts: save the world, make money, be happy. And our education system should really include specific implementations that allow us to go in that direction.
Thank you so much, Mr. Carlos. سيادة الرئيس بدأنا بالحديث.
Your Excellency, the President, we started by speaking about fostering Mediterranean regional cooperation, and then we delved into more complicated details. Now, Your Excellency, we need your input on the matter. It's a very difficult task. It's a very difficult task. Allow me at the outset to welcome all of you and to thank you for the contributions you offered. Allow me also to mention that in Egypt we had an approach regarding what has happened in our region. It was implemented throughout the 5 to 6 past years. I mean, if we can't solve the problem radically, we need to alleviate its effects. If we're speaking about terrorism, irregular migration, organized crime, all the themes touched upon in the morning or now. I agree with all of what you said, but if we can't reach a comprehensive solution, then we need to speak about a solution for the time being. Let's say that what happened throughout the past 10 years has created a state of security imbalance in our region. And when this took place, the pillars on which the countries were built, regardless, whether they're south or north of the Mediterranean, but let's speak about southern Mediterranean countries. There was some sort of stability where we could have some organized procedures, even when it had to do with the irregular migration. However, such balance, such order was tampered with, and the impact of which we're seeing in Syria, in the Sahel and Saharan countries. We see it in Somalia. We saw it in Egypt in a previous time. So when we're speaking about getting the national states back, this was not a bias to a certain regime. It was not a bias to a certain individual. It was a bias to a certain status, the status of stability, because the imbalance, the strategic imbalance that took place was something that we would all have to face sooner or later. You all spoke about refugees in Egypt from different countries, but in Egypt we don't call these people refugees. We call them guests. They are our guests. Whether they're 5 million, 6 million, we do not speak of refugees, we speak of guests. And Her Excellency Ambassador Gabr said that these figures come from international statistics. But since September 2016, we've been able to prevent irregular migration, whether that was through land or sea. Now, I would like to enlarge the scope of our discussion so that I might be able to explain to you what I have to say. Egypt managed to do that when the country regained its stability, the stability that the country lost through the first year since 2011 to 2016. So it's not about the will of the state only. It's the will of the state and the capability of the state. This capability that was regained by September 2016, one way or another. This means that we were able to control our borders in accordance with the commitment of our state towards our citizens and towards our country. Our citizens, we had to prevent them from just jumping into the sea and losing their lives consequently. And then we would be shouldering the responsibility. And I don't know whether or not we can take some of the participants in the forum and take them to streets where people are working and they have businesses, people who we call guests. These guests, they have businesses in Egypt, and we do not allow any forms of negative treatment of them, or even a negative mention of them in the media or in the eyes of public opinion. Once more, we need to speak of something important. Instead of wasting time on speaking about terrorism and migration, we need to speak of the more important issues. In Syria, if the state regains its stability and control, I think that all the millions in neighboring countries will come back. So the more we postpone the measures to be taken, the more things deteriorate in Syria. So while we're speaking, we need to bear in mind that these ideas need to be materialized. But it's very difficult within the current context of the region. So now you're still speaking about where these refugees are going to go, where you're speaking of support given to host countries. What about helping their countries of origin? How can this be achieved, that countries just stop interfering in the Syrian affairs and in other countries as well? and what they perceive as their interests, that Syria would remain unstable. I don't want to mention any names or any countries. What about Libya? The same applies to Libya. It has become a transit country, and in 2007, 2008, and 2009, it was not a transit country. It did not allow irregular migration to cross over to Europe. So now what's going on in Libya? And now I'm addressing all those who can hear me now. Who has, our national security in Egypt is very much related to that of Libya. So we could have intervened in Libya, and we have the capabilities to do so, but we did not do so. We respected the country, and we chose to preserve the fraternity between us and the Libyan people, because the Libyan people wouldn't have ever forgotten such interference if it had taken place. So why don't we deal with matters like that in the region in order for the national state to regain its status, in order to minimize the problem? These problems from 2011 up till now are like the domino effect, a crisis accumulating on top of another crisis. What's happening in Lebanon, and I hope that my brother, the Lebanese minister, would accept these words from me. What happened in Lebanon was the result of accumulation of crises, like His Excellency mentioned. So what if things deteriorate in Lebanon to much worse? Then we're going to have not only Syria, but also Lebanon, who are facing the same crisis. The crisis would have an enlarged scope. The crisis won't have to do with only migrants or refugees from Syria. It will also reach Lebanon. Imagine those 4 million Lebanese people getting affected by the same crisis. I hope that you understand what I mean. Then there could be some displacement to Europe or to other neighborly countries. So I think that we've already demanded this. The national state should come back, should regain its status. And 5 years ago, people used to listen to this and just speak about irrelevant points. We used to say that there were going to be catastrophic impacts, but the point is we need to regain these countries that lost a huge deal of their national sovereignty. The other point that I need to emphasize is that we had a vision when we said that national armies are the ones in charge of the stability and security inside their countries. Why did we say that? In order to avoid having armed militias, in order to avoid having terrorism, because national armies are unbiased. They don't have any affiliations or biases. They only care for their homelands. And this is why I ask this question. Why, from all the countries of the region, was Egypt the only survivor? Because of Egypt's army. The army is made up of Muslims and Christians alike. From Upper Egyptians, people from Lower Egypt, all of them are equals. And Of course, the army has only its national affiliation, the affiliation to the country. So when we were speaking about instability, it was always a result of implementing the agendas of external actors. Why can't the governments in Libya affect any change now? Because unfortunately they are hostage to the armed militias in Tripoli. Unfortunately, if we keep on dealing with things according to individual interests, things are not going to work out. Our best interest is that we come together in order to solve the problems and face the issues collectively. When we speak of terrorism, again, here I have to say that it has become a tool, a means, in the light of the development or the new warfare, the fourth and fifth generation of digital warfare. It's a tool in order to destabilize countries politically. And any measure that we need to take, or any country that needs to take a measure against another country, needs to be governed by international legitimacy and international law, except for terrorism. No one can hold terrorists accountable. Why? Because there is no designated entity that we can hold accountable. So we need to agree here that we cannot accept using terrorism to achieve political purposes. What about Egypt? By the way, I'm not marketing my country, but I'm just emphasizing that we had and still have a vision. We never conspire with anyone, no matter how many differences we have. And when I say conspire, it refers to using legitimate or illegitimate tools, usually illegitimate tools. But Egypt, even when there are issues that are very sensitive when it has to do with its national security, has never gone into any conspiracy against any other country. So maybe some people would have the view that we are exposing our national security because things do not work out according to these noble and lofty values. Yes, maybe I've heard this before, but we are still determined to solve our problems, even with those that we have differences with, through patience and through negotiations, because we believe that conspiring or using terrorism or armed intervention, the impact of all of those will be detrimental to all of us. The evidence to which is that in 2003, there was an intervention in Iraq. What was the impact? What were the results? 16 years on after this intervention, is this the Iraq that we dreamt of? And I hope that this won't cause any problem with our Iraqi brothers and sisters, because I only mean to enrich our discussion. We need to learn from the lessons that we have before us. 16 years ago, there was an intervention in Iraq. And now we have ISIL in Syria and in Iraq, and with combat going on for 3 to 4 years, with Iraq being almost completely destroyed. Iraq used to be an incredibly wealthy country. And I'm not defending Arab countries. I will still speak about African countries, and I'll speak about irregular migration from the south to the north in one way or another. But my point is that this problem could have been minimized. We could have had an organized dialogue that would have spared us all the impacts we suffer from in the region today. And this applies to Europe and to South Mediterranean countries. Now, many points have been raised regarding providing or creating job opportunities in the South Mediterranean countries and African countries, because you spoke about happiness, about making money, and all of these are important points. And we've already mentioned that if you want to change the face of the African continent throughout 10 years, then we need to have a continental program or continental projects for infrastructure in the continent that will cost us $200 billion US. This is not a high price to be paid by the world, and it's not going to be a grant. It's going to be a loan, and it will be to the purpose of changing the future of Africa to the better. If we are speaking now about $200 billion US and 1.3 billion human beings that could reach 2 billions in several years, most of them are young people, then we need to address the relevant issues. When these numbers increase, it means also an increase of the relevant threats. And by the way, I've mentioned that during my visits to all countries, China, Japan, Europe, I said that Africa is a new promising market. It's just passing through a difficult phase. When we change this market to increase the income of the population, then it will be a very promising market for international commerce and trade. And now going back to the issue of irregular migration. It's not that we have a magical wand, but we need to speak of practical solutions. I've written all what you have mentioned in order to benefit from it. But I just want to say that sometimes when we speak in forums, in conferences, everything seems very rosy, but implementation on the ground is a whole different thing. Now, when we speak about different forms of migration, whether rotational, seasonal, regular or irregular, all what you said is really important. But I think that things could be better if things had been more stable in different countries, especially like countries of the Sahel and sub-Saharan countries. The desertification in Africa is an issue. What about people who used to thrive on agriculture and then their livelihoods have been compromised? So there are internal waves of migration, and this leads to instability and other further internal problems and domestic problems. Also, when I speak about serial crises or the domino effect of crises, we need to bear this concept in mind, because these issues need to be tackled collectively. We can't tackle them individually. Once more, I would like to go back to Egypt. Have we managed to be successful in our endeavors throughout the past 5 years? The answer is yes, because when there were Egyptian migrants coming back from Libya, we had to deal with that. There were hundreds of thousands of youth, Egyptian youth who used to work in Libya. When the crisis took place there, they had to go back to Egypt. That was one of the negative impacts on the country. But we carried on our infrastructure program, which was unprecedented in Egypt. Why? In order to create opportunities, job opportunities for people. Otherwise, these unemployed youth would have had a detrimental effect on the country. So what was the impact of this infrastructure program? It led Egypt to a completely different level of investment and development. The whole world now is asking this question: how could Egypt do that in 5 years? Once more, the answer is, if we are keen on solving the problems of security and stability in our region, then our partner countries, whether in Europe or in other parts of the world, need to address this issue as follows: that this issue touches us all. If you think that postponing the solution or avoidance or getting into conflicts regarding the solutions, you need to know that all of this has a detrimental effect on all of us. Regaining peace and stability in our region is key, as well as addressing issues in a from a wider perspective is also a key. It's a must. The recommendation that we need to convince people outside the scope of this forum is as follows. There is something that I didn't manage to mention this morning. I think that part of respecting differences and variety throughout the whole world has to do with respecting that values of other countries cannot be applied in our countries. If we say that we are different, we're all speaking about differences and respecting such differences and so on, then this means that there are some countries that need to understand that they cannot intervene in other countries' matters. And we need to be aware of our differences, even in our endeavors to reform. We're different in our visions. We can't speak about the development in South Mediterranean countries being equal to that on the other side of the Mediterranean. And so nobody can actually enforce change or force it. I think that we could have seen different versions of events than what happened in our countries. I don't know if I've managed to explain my idea clearly or not, that you have to market your ideas well. I need to benefit from you in that regard. Thank you so much.